Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are going to dive right into a mystery that pretty much everyone has experienced at least once, but very few actually understand from a hard scientific perspective. We're talking about why finishing a massive, exhausting goal often leaves you feeling strangely restless or even kind of sad, instead of just unequivocally happy. We are going to look incredibly closely at the actual physical neuroscience of comfort. And trust me, the way your brain's biological hardware responds to an easy life is absolutely fascinating. You totally know the feeling, right? You finally cross the finish line after months, maybe even years of grueling hard work. You submit the massive project, you get the degree, or maybe you hit that big financial milestone. But instead of that overwhelming relief or the pure joy you were expecting, you're hit with this hollow, anxious emptiness, a strange, wondering, now what? Why does a huge victory suddenly feel like an empty void? So, meet Bob. He's our tired office stickman, and he just finished his big task. He's staring blankly at his desk, experiencing that exact emptiness we just talked about. But here is what you really need to understand. What Bob is feeling right now isn't a psychological weakness. It's not a lack of gratitude. It is a literal, urgent neurological warning signal firing off inside his brain. Part 1. The unchallenged brain, a biological breakdown. To really grasp this, we gotta start with a massive number, 86 billion. That is roughly how many neurons you have packed inside your brain. And these aren't just abstract concepts. These are physical, living cells. They connect to one another through synapses using continuous electrical impulses, forming the staggering, highly complex network. This physical hardware fundamentally defines your skills, your knowledge, your memories, and your daily capabilities. But here is the critical catch. That old saying, use it or lose it, yeah, that's not just a catchy self-help phrase. It is a literal biological mechanism called synaptic pruning. Think of your brain like a highly efficient city grid that automatically shuts off power to unused neighborhoods just to conserve energy. When your brain isn't being challenged anymore, it doesn't just sit there peacefully. It actively, physically dismantles the neural pathways that haven't been fired up recently. It literally deletes unused connections. Evolution built your brain for survival and complex problem solving, not for a stable, unchallenging routine. Which brings us to Section 2, Sapolsky and the dopamine collapse. Stanford University neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky spent literally decades mapping out exactly how our dopamine systems work, and what he found completely shatters our mainstream understanding of motivation. He proved a phenomenal neurological fact. Dopamine doesn't actually fire when you receive a reward. It fires in anticipation of an uncertain reward. That massive chemical spike that gives you drive and energy, it happens entirely during the chase, not at the finish line. So think about what this means. When life becomes totally predictable, when there's a guaranteed reward with absolutely no friction, no uncertainty, no difficulty, your brain just simply stops producing that dopamine spike. Real motivation biologically collapses because there is literally no uncertainty left to solve. And a brain starved of productive uncertainty, it will hijack its own systems. It starts desperately seeking out cheap, low-effort dopamine, like endlessly scrolling on a phone or reaching for junk food, just to simulate a fake reward cycle and feel some baseline level of stimulation. Section 3, Mason's Default Mode Network. This is where the brilliant neurological breakthroughs from researcher Molly Mason at Columbia University come into play. She figured out exactly what happens physically in the brain's networks when you have no external challenge to focus on, and your mind is just left idling in its own internal dark room. In her landmark study, she identified the immense power of the default mode network, or DMN. These are the interconnected brain regions that light up and become highly active when your mind is just wandering. Evolutionarily speaking, an idling brain scans the environment for threats. But today, without an external physical challenge to solve, your brain turns its massive processing power inward. It literally starts manufacturing its own internal problems, trapping you in a miserable loop of rumination, anxiety, and self-referential negative thinking. Section 4, the optimal flow state. So, how do we actually escape this trap? How do we break that terrible anxiety loop and get the brain firing at its absolute peak performance? Well, the answer goes all the way back to the 1908 Yerkes-Dodson law, which proved that performance peaks at moderate stress levels. But it was fully modernized by University of Chicago psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He gave us the biological answer to this idle anxiety, finding your flow state. Neurologically, getting into flow induces a state called transient hypofrontality, which physically quiets the harsh inner critic in your prefrontal cortex. Now, flow is a peak performance zone, and it has highly specific requirements. You need a challenge level that sits just slightly above your current skill. You need complete cognitive absorption, and you must be willing to choose productive difficulty over comfort. Think of the difference between trying to master a tough new guitar chord versus mindlessly strumming one you've known for years. It is neurologically impossible to reach a flow state if you are sitting comfortably. It demands genuine, productive difficulty to pull you out of the default mode network's anxiety loop. Section 5, long-term cognitive decline. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, but hey, I really like my comfort zone. Well, if you consistently avoid productive difficulty, the long-term biological consequences for your brain are, frankly, terrifying. A massive 2020 meta-analysis that tracked 28,000 participants revealed a staggering statistic. There is a 46% higher risk of dementia for individuals who maintain chronically low cognitive stimulation across adulthood. Let that sink in for a second. Comfort isn't just relaxing. Chronologically, it literally accelerates cognitive decline. And it gets even more physical. A 2017 study in NeuroImage actually showed measurable physical volume loss in the prefrontal cortex for individuals stuck in unchallenging routines. This is the exact area of the brain responsible for high-level decision-making and personality. But there is a powerful antidote here. Michael Merzenich, a global pioneer in neuroplasticity out of UCSF, proved that targeted, difficult cognitive challenges can maintain and even dramatically improve neural connectivity at absolutely any age. Section 6, rebuilding through deliberate difficulty. Through the profound biological magic of neuroplasticity, you have the power to physically rebuild your brain's architecture at literally any point in your life. Let me show you just how powerful this is. A landmark 2013 study in the prestigious journal Neuron placed one group of rats in a standard, unstimulating environment and another group in an enriched, highly challenging environment. The researchers discovered that the rats navigating the difficult environment actually grew 25% more dendritic connections in their hippocampus. They didn't just learn a new trick, their brains actively built 25% more physical hardware to handle the new difficulty. Furthermore, Stanford's Carol Dweck built a vital bridge between psychology and this hard neuroscience through her mindset research. She showed that tackling difficulty with a growth mindset, the underlying belief that your abilities can actually be expanded through effort, literally creates measurably different neural activation patterns on an fMRI brain scan compared to a fixed mindset. How you internally approach a difficulty physically dictates how your brain wires itself over time. So, let's bring it all back to our friend Bob. The huge neurological takeaway today is that the post-achievement emptiness Bob feels is not a weakness, and it certainly isn't ingratitude. It is an evolutionary invitation. That is 86 billion neurons actively begging for the next hard thing so they don't have to prune themselves away. Whenever you feel that slump, it's just your biological hardware asking for an upgrade. Your brain is biologically designed to thrive on difficulty, not comfort. Comfort is literally the zone of zero growth, and as we've just seen, physical decline. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to look at your own life and ask yourself this one vital question. What hard thing will you choose to conquer next to rebuild your brain? Let that sink in, embrace the challenge, and keep building those neural pathways.